Tonight's story begins quietly. No emergency sirens, no late-night press conference, no headline-grabbing announcement flashing across television screens. Yet behind the scenes, something monumental has already happened. A shift, carefully calculated, rapidly executed, and now fully locked into law. Transportation officials anticipated it. Lawmakers debated it behind closed doors. Insurance industry analysts modeled it months in advance. But for everyday American drivers, the reality of what just passed is only now becoming clear. Because starting January 2026, how you drive, how much you pay, and how closely you are monitored on the road will change permanently. And if you're not prepared, the financial consequences could be severe. For decades, there was an understanding, unspoken but deeply felt, between the federal government and the American driver. Yes, traffic laws would evolve. Yes, enforcement would modernize. But there were limits. Limits on surveillance. Limits on automation. Limits on how deeply federal authority could reach into daily driving behavior. This year, those limits were crossed. Not slowly, not gradually, but decisively. What Congress approved and what the Department of Transportation implemented represents one of the most aggressive transformations of driving regulation in modern American history. And unlike past changes, these didn't unfold over years of public debate. They happened in months. For nearly 18 months, subtle warning signs appeared. Not official announcements, not press releases, just signals. Quiet, technical, easy to ignore if you weren't watching closely. Federal transportation committees began meeting more frequently and more privately. Technology firms with no previous role in traffic enforcement were suddenly involved in policy discussions. Enforcement budgets quietly shifted. Money moved away from traditional programs and toward advanced systems, few outside the industry understood. At the same time, something else happened. Opposition disappeared. Automotive lobbying groups, usually vocal and aggressive, went silent. Insurance companies stopped speculating and started preparing. State legislatures began adjusting their traffic codes, quietly aligning them with federal language before the public ever knew why. To policy analysts, this silence meant only one thing. A major move was imminent. In Washington, silence is rarely accidental. When transportation policy goes quiet, it's often because negotiations are already finished and the outcome is no longer in question. This spring, that silence reached a breaking point. Federal analysts noticed a sudden spike in procurement requests for enforcement technology. Law enforcement agencies began acquiring systems that hadn't been widely used in over 30 years, updated, modernized, and automated. Insurance actuarial tables were revised. Nationwide, risk models changed. Premium projections shifted upward, not because accidents were increasing, but because enforcement was about to become unavoidable. The question was no longer if new driving laws were coming. The question was how strict they would be. Early this summer, the Department of Transportation made it official, not with fanfare, not with celebration, but with language that stunned policy insiders. They described the changes as a comprehensive overhaul of federal driving. Regulations, that phrase matters, because comprehensive means everything. Your vehicle, your behavior, your data, your penalties, and most importantly, how violations are detected. The enforcement mechanisms outlined had not been used at the federal level in more than 3 decades. This wasn't a tweak, it was a reset. Federal regulators don't deploy sweeping regulations unless they're signaling something larger. Sometimes it's about safety, sometimes about revenue, sometimes about control. In this case, it was all three. What emerged was a new philosophy of driving accountability, one that assumes compliance must be verified continuously, not assumed. That means fewer warnings, fewer second chances, and far less discretion. For drivers, this marks the beginning of a new era where violations are detected automatically, penalties are issued digitally, and appeals become far more difficult. And this time, the system is designed to catch everyone. These 5 rules represent the most significant changes to American driving law since 1966. They affect your car, your wallet, your insurance, your driving record, and in some cases, your freedom. Let's break them down. Rule 1. Automated federal speed enforcement expansion. Speed enforcement is no longer primarily handled by local discretion. Beginning January 2026, federally approved automated speed monitoring systems will expand nationwide, particularly on highways, interstates, and major arterial roads. These systems do not require police presence, operate 24/7, automatically issue citations, transmit violations directly to federal databases. Even minor excess speed violations, previously ignored or warned, may now trigger fines, and those fines escalate faster than ever before. Rule 2. Insurance penalty integration. This is where many drivers will feel the impact most. Under the new framework, certain violations will be automatically shared with insurance providers without delay. No waiting for court dates. No gradual premium adjustments. Insurance companies will receive violation data almost immediately, allowing them to adjust premiums in real time, reclassify risk status, remove discounts instantly. For some drivers, one violation could mean hundreds or thousands more per year. Rule 3. Mandatory vehicle compliance tracking. Vehicles manufactured after a specific cutoff date will be required to maintain active compliance systems. These systems monitor speed behavior, seatbelt usage, certain driver assistance overrides. Failure to maintain compliance or intentional disabling can now result in fines, registration issues, or inspection failures. This rule shifts responsibility directly onto drivers, not manufacturers. Rule 4. Reduced warning thresholds. Warnings are no longer guaranteed. Federal guidance now encourages enforcement agencies to issue citations where warnings were once standard. That includes rolling stops, minor lane violations, repeated low-level offenses. The era of just a warning this time is ending. Rule 5. Federal escalation for repeat offenders. Previously, many violations stayed local. Now, repeat offenses can trigger federal review. That can mean license restrictions, mandatory retraining programs, increased penalties across state lines. Driving history is no longer confined to one jurisdiction. Why this matters more than you think? Let's be clear. These are not suggestions. These are not guidelines. And they are not optional. They are enforceable federal regulations with real financial consequences, and they take effect in just weeks. The advisory issued by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration was anything but routine. Officials described these rules as transformative, non-negotiable, immediately enforceable. That language matters, because it means there will be no grace period. The cost of ignoring what's coming. Many drivers will dismiss this as hype. They always do. But history shows that when enforcement systems change quietly, penalties hit loudly. Higher fines, higher insurance costs, less flexibility, less forgiveness. And for those who fail to adapt, the financial strain can be devastating. Final warning. Awareness only works if drivers pay attention. January 2026 isn't a distant date anymore. It's approaching fast. Once these systems go live, there will be no rollback, no easy appeals, no pretending this doesn't apply to you. because this time it applies to everyone. One of the most troubling aspects of this regulatory shift isn't just what changed, it's how quietly it happened. There were no nationwide driver alerts, no mandatory notices at license renewal offices, no large-scale public education campaign explaining what was coming. Instead, the responsibility to understand these changes was quietly placed on the individual driver. Federal officials assumed awareness would filter down. History shows it rarely does. And when awareness fails, enforcement does not hesitate. The technology behind the enforcement. To understand why these rules are different, you need to understand the systems now backing them. This is not old-school traffic enforcement. No flashing lights. No officer discretion. No roadside explanations. Modern enforcement relies on AI-assisted traffic monitoring, automated violation classification, digital citation issuance, cross-agency data sharing. Once a violation is detected, the process moves faster than a human ever could. Data is captured. Violation is classified. Penalty is assigned. Notification is generated. In many cases, by the time a driver realizes a violation occurred, the fine is already on its way. Why appeals are becoming harder. Traditionally, drivers relied on one thing: human judgment. An officer could issue a warning. A judge could show leniency. A case could be dismissed due to discretion. Automation changes there. Automated systems don't get tired. They don't overlook details. They don't negotiate. They record what happened, and that record becomes the primary evidence. Appeals are still possible, but the burden of proof now falls heavily on the driver. And for many, the cost of fighting a violation may exceed the cost of paying it. Insurance companies knew this was coming. Long before the public heard anything, insurance companies were preparing. Quietly, behind closed doors, actuarial teams began recalculating risk models based not on accident rates, but enforcement certainty. This is a critical shift. Historically, insurance premiums increased when accidents increased. Now, premiums rise when violations become unavoidable. And automated enforcement makes violations far more predictable. That predictability is gold for insurance companies. It allows them to adjust premiums faster, penalize repeat behavior more aggressively, remove safe driver classifications with less flexibility. For drivers, that means even minor infractions can have long-lasting financial consequences. Why even careful drivers are at risk. Many people assume these rules target reckless drivers, speeders, aggressive drivers, repeat offenders, but that assumption is dangerous because automated systems don't distinguish intent, a moment of distraction, a slight speed variance downhill, a rolling stop late at night. Under the new framework, those moments count. And when systems track behavior continuously, patterns emerge faster than drivers expect. A few minor violations over time can now paint a picture of non-compliance. That label carries consequences. State versus federal, the lines are blurring. For decades, traffic enforcement was primarily a state and local matter. That boundary is now fading. Federal oversight is expanding, not to replace state enforcement, but to integrate with it. That means violations in one state may affect your status nationwide. Federal standards influence local penalties. Driving records become more centralized for interstate drivers, truckers, commuters, travelers. This matters enormously. What used to stay local no longer does. Why this feels different from past law changes. Some viewers may be thinking, we've heard this before. Driving laws change all the time. That's true, but this time the foundation is different. Path changes, adjusted rules. This change adjusts systems. And systems once deployed rarely roll back. They scale, they expand, they normalize. What feels strict today becomes standard tomorrow. The psychological impact on drivers. Beyond fine and insurance, there's another consequence few are talking about. Behavioral pressure. When drivers know they're constantly monitored, driving changes. Some will become overly cautious, others anxious, some distracted by fear of mistakes. This shift affects traffic flow, congestion, and even accident dynamics. Ironically, over-enforcement can sometimes create new risks, but those effects won't show up immediately, and by the time they do, the systems will already be entrenched.